Welcome to the Love Story with Lisa channel. Today, we're bringing you a brand new story. My father took him in. He swore he would care for me, yet he married her, and stood by as I was beaten to death. Synopsis: Julian Pei was the young scholar my father brought home for me. Yet after he rose to become the top scholar of the imperial examination, his heart turned wholly toward Princess Eleanor. In my previous life, I stormed into their wedding to cause a scene. I was dragged away by the princess's vicious guards, beaten brutally, and left to die miserably in the street, but this time I will not repeat that mistake. When Julian Pei came to see me, I was sweeping the courtyard. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, like a gust of autumn wind drifting across a desolate mountain field. His gaze fell upon the broom in my hand. His brows knit slightly. "The 15th of next month," he said, "is the day of my wedding to Princess Eleanor." I straightened slowly and replied in an even tone, "Then I wish you and the princess a lifetime of harmony." A flicker of surprise flashed through his eyes. He stared at me for a long moment, as if waiting for something that never came. I knew very well that, according to the temperament of my former self, I should have thrown down the broom, rushed forward, clung to him, weeping and begging him not to abandon me. But I had already lived through one lifetime. How could I possibly step into the same trap again, seeing that he remained silent? I asked lightly, "What is it? Do you expect a wedding gift from me as well?" He did not answer. His frown only deepened. I extended a hand toward the door. "Forgive me. Do take care on your way out. I won't see you off." On the day of their wedding, the 10-Mile Avenue was ablaze with celebration. Standing among the throng of curious onlookers, I watched him ride proudly at the front of the procession, a red flower pinned to his chest. His posture was confident, triumphant, every inch the man who had reached the pinnacle of glory. Though my heart was calm as still water, I could not stop my teeth from grinding together. He had once been an orphan, taken in by my father out of compassion, raised in our home as the future son-in-law of the Vaughn family. That year, I was 13. After a severe illness, my father went to join my mother in the next world. On his deathbed, he clasped my hand and placed it into Julian Pei's, gripping tightly as he spoke. "From this day forward, I entrust this girl to you. You must take good care of her." At that time, Julian Pei had answered solemnly, "Please rest assured, uncle. I will treat Nin well." After father passed away, I gathered all the money he had left behind and used it to support Julian's studies. 2 years later, he became the top scholar, first among all candidates, standing within the Golden Hall, personally granted his title by His Majesty the Emperor. A year after that, I came of age. Everyone in the village knew of my engagement to Julian Pei. When news arrived that he had placed first in the imperial examinations, the villagers crowded into my home to offer congratulations. "Nin girl is truly blessed. Soon to be the wife of the top scholar." But before long, another piece of news followed. He had not only become the top scholar, he was about to become a prince consort. I refused to believe it. I hurried to seek him out, but each time he avoided me. Only then, standing before the newly painted crimson gates of his grand residence, staring at the fierce-looking guards posted outside, did I realize how vast the gulf between us had grown. It was like heaven and earth. The next time I saw him was on the day of his wedding to Princess Eleanor. In my previous life, I had rushed to his gates to cause trouble, determined to ruin their ceremony. Yet before everyone's eyes, Princess Eleanor lifted her bridal veil and cast me a cold glance. Where did this rustic village woman crawl out from? She sneered. "Guards, drag her away and beat her." I never imagined they would beat me to death. Julian Pei stood at the side, indifferent, watching it all as though he did not even know who I was, alone in the street, my blood staining the ground, pain consuming my senses until everything went dark. Only then did I understand. Julian Pei had never once intended to marry me. I had merely been his stepping stone. The one he used to pave his road toward power and prestige. I died with hatred in my heart. When I opened my eyes again, I had been reborn. I returned to the moment when the news of Julian Pei's triumph as top scholar first reached our village. Once more, the entire village congratulated me, believing I would soon become the wife of the top scholar. Destined for a life of honor. Once more, I went to seek him out many times, just as in my previous life, and never managed to see him. Today was his wedding day. I had merely gone into town to purchase some household items when I once again witnessed the most glorious moment of his life. The man riding at the head of the procession seemed to sense something. He turned his head and looked toward me. Our eyes met. His expression tightened instantly, afraid, no doubt, that I would suddenly cause a disturbance and ruin his wedding. I let out a cold laugh, turned, and walked away without the slightest hesitation. Back home, I set down the items I had bought and continued sweeping the courtyard. When my father was alive, he had been a licentiate scholar, Master Vaughn. After failing the provincial examinations multiple times, and burdened with raising me alone, he abandoned further attempts and instead opened a small private school in the village. Back then, Julian Pei had fled from another region and run all the way to Willow Leaf Village. He hid beneath the outer wall of our courtyard. My father discovered him. After asking a few questions, father realized the boy was promising stock, an excellent seedling, merely delayed in his studies. So he took him in and raised him, intending him to become my future husband. As the years passed, I saw more and more clearly that Julian possessed extraordinary talent, brilliance that soared beyond the ordinary. I paid careful attention to him, urged him to study diligently each day. At first, he helped with the housework, sweeping the courtyard, chopping firewood, tending the stove. But gradually, father forbade him from doing such chores, insisting he focus solely on his studies so he might achieve success. He once knelt before my father and swore solemnly that in this lifetime, he would never forget uncle's kindness in raising and educating him. By the time father passed away, Julian Pei had already earned the title of provincial graduate, only one step away from becoming a Jinshi. Moreover, in daily life he indulged me in everything. Whatever I wished for, he granted. That was why father entrusted me to him with peace of mind. What father never imagined was that Julian Pei had deceived us all. The moment he attained success, he turned his face away, an ungrateful wretch, no better than a beast. It was a pity that I only saw his true nature at the moment of my death. Now that heaven has granted me another chance, I no longer wish to entangle myself with him in the slightest. I only wish to live out this life on my own terms. This time, when I went into the city, I purchased paper, ink, and brushes. I intended to reopen the private school. After much thought, I realized the only thing I truly knew was how to read and write, skills my father had trained into me since childhood. Becoming a female tutor and opening a small elementary class was the most practical path I could think of. I posted a notice outside Three Mountains School. It would reopen in 3 days. During those 3 days, I carried out all the desks, chairs, and cushions father once used. I washed them, wiped them down, dried them in the sun. I swept and cleaned the grain store and book room thoroughly. My heart brimmed with joy and anticipation. It felt as though my new life was about to begin. Yet when the 3rd day arrived, the entrance stood empty. Not a soul. What can a mere girl possibly know? And she wants to be a teacher? She truly doesn't know her place in this world. Mr. Grant, the butcher next door, walked past carrying vegetables and freshly slaughtered pork, shouting loudly enough for half the street to hear. The surrounding neighbors began whispering. Nin girl's father was a licentiate scholar. But she isn't. What could she possibly teach? Dogs and cats? Exactly. A little girl like her should hurry and marry into a decent family. What nonsense about becoming a teacher. She's utterly ignorant. Lower your voice. Have you forgotten about her top scholar fiancé? Fiancé? Ha! How pitiful. I have 2 daughters, why would I send them to study? Better they help me with chores. My son certainly won't be sent to her. So I followed father's old example. I went to the dilapidated temple outside the village and brought back a child. The only difference was this: I brought back a little girl. Clara had been a beggar child drifting in from elsewhere. The villagers were kind. In the past 2 years, harvests had been good, so from time to time they gave her scraps of food or leftovers from their own children's meals. It was barely enough to keep her alive. She's sheltered in the broken temple outside the village. I crouched down and asked her gently, "Clara, would you be willing to come home with me?" Her dirt-smudged face broke into a radiant smile. She opened her round, grape-like eyes wide and stared at me. "If I go home with you, sister, will there be food?" I smiled. "Not only food and drink. There will be a warm bed. And I will teach you how to read." Clara jumped up in delight. "Yes. I'll go home with sister. I'll go home." After bringing her back and bathing her clean, I discovered she was in fact an adorable little girl. Long-term hunger had left her sallow and thin, her hair tangled and unkempt. Father had named me Serena Vaughn, hoping I would live a peaceful and joyful life, upright and self-respecting. So I gave her the name Clara Vaughn. I hoped her heart would remain clear and pure as spring water, that no matter what hardships she faced, she would never forget her original intentions. Clara was overjoyed to receive this name. She spent the entire day hopping about the courtyard in excitement. When I prepared dinner that evening, she dragged a small stool beside the stove and sat close to the fire, happily murmuring her new name over and over to herself. Once everything was settled, I began teaching Clara to read. First, I taught her to recognize characters, starting with the simplest. 1, 2, 3. A month passed, and she could already recite the 3-character classic. Clara was not blessed with extraordinary talent, but she was far more diligent than most. Each day I taught her one new character. In secret, she practiced writing it dozens of times. She knew paper, ink, and brushes were expensive, so she often used a wooden stick to write in the dirt. When the ground was covered in characters, she wiped it smooth with her foot and began again, day after day. Month after month, I did not stop her. The truth was, I was indeed impoverished. In the past, to support Julian Pay's studies, I had already spent nearly all the wealth father left behind. The recent trip to the city to purchase paper and ink had required me to sell the hairpin my mother left me in exchange for silver. I had once copied books for a bookstore in the city to earn a bit of money for the household. But Julian Pay had been wholly absorbed in his studies. He never knew that the food he ate had been bought with coins earned by my fingers copying texts until they were nearly deformed. Now I had returned to that trade once more. I believed firmly that I would survive this difficult period. Copying one book earned 2 copper coins. If the text was longer, perhaps 4 or 5 coins. In a day, I could copy 3 books, sometimes 4 or 5 at most. But even so, that was all there was. The books at the shop could not be taken home. Otherwise, I would have been able to copy far more, so during the day, I copied texts at the bookstore. At night, I returned home to teach Clara her characters. Before leaving each morning, I prepared enough food for the entire day, one portion left in the kitchen for Clara, one portion carried with me. Washing clothes, cooking meals, Clara quietly learned by watching me. She required very little instruction. One evening, when I returned home, I found she had already bathed, washed her clothes, and hung them neatly in the courtyard. They fluttered in the wind like little victory flags. She was nibbling on a cucumber to ward off the chill, leaning there as she watched me, smiling and chewing contentedly. At that moment, I knew with certainty, Clara was nothing like Julian Pay, a man who could read books yet not distinguish between the 5 grains. Whose hands and feet were useless, who, in the end, even forgot the most basic morality of being human. Thus, the way I taught Clara was entirely different from how my father had taught Julian Pay. Before Clara learned knowledge, she had to learn how to be a person. That evening, I deliberately came home early and divided the meat buns I had bought in the city, giving her one. Clara was overjoyed. Meat was a rare treat. After eating her fill, she asked me, "Sister, why must I study?" Only then did I realize. This child did not truly love learning at the beginning. She studied because I had brought her home and taught her. She studied because she wished to please me. How could such a motive be enough? I picked up the 3-character classic, which she had already learned, and pointed to a passage. "Read this." She tilted her head slightly and read aloud in a clear voice. "If a child does not study, it is not as it should be. If one does not learn in youth, what will one become in old age?" She paused and looked at me. "Continue." "Jade unpolished cannot become a vessel. A person unlearned does not understand righteousness." I said gently, "Clara, you must remember, reading is not only to gain knowledge or learn proper etiquette. More importantly, it is to understand the principles of this world. To distinguish right from wrong. To live uprightly. A person may possess knowledge yet lack virtue, may not understand righteousness. In that case, no matter how profound their learning, it is meaningless." Clara seemed to ponder my words deeply. After that day, she grew especially fond of those 4 lines. Whenever she had nothing to do, she would recite them aloud. Her voice was crisp and bright as a bird's song. The small figure stood in the courtyard, holding a broom taller than herself, sweeping as she chanted. Her voice drifted far into the distance. Only then did I truly feel that she had come to love learning. What I did not expect was that her clear, ringing voice would become the very reason Three Mountain School reopened its doors. At first, I had intended to teach Clara well to prove something, to prove that I, though a woman, could open a school and teach children just as men did. That women, too, could study properly. I had once imagined the day Three Mountain School reopened, a grand scene, crowds flocking to enroll. Instead, it was a single beautiful voice that accomplished what I could not. That day, villagers were drawn by Clara's reading voice and gathered outside our gate. "Father, what is she reading? It sounds so pleasant." "Mother, even that beggar girl reads so well." "I want to learn too." "Mother, I want to study like Clara." "I want to read too." The doorway filled with the noisy chatter of children, boys and girls alike. Hearing the commotion, I opened the gate. I found myself facing a crowd. Mrs. Lawson craned her head into the courtyard. When she saw little Clara standing there, she slapped her thigh. "Oh my! Nin girl, is that really the beggar child? She's grown so pretty and clean." In recent months, Clara had eaten well. She had filled out, her face round and fair. Taller than before, her features delicate and charming, utterly different from the filthy little waif I first brought home. Smiling, I asked, "Mrs. Lawson, what brings everyone here?" Mrs. Lawson spoke first. "Nin girl, was that just now truly Clara reading?" I laughed softly. Who else could it be? Is there a third person in this house? Mrs. Lawson slapped her thigh again. That was wonderful. Why don't you teach my two boys as well? With Mrs. Lawson taking the lead, the other families quickly pushed their children forward. Teach my boy too. And my third sister. And my Chwaner. Teach them all. In an instant, my doorway became as lively as a market stall. My heart pounded. Just like that, Three Mountains School reopened. The next day, the children arrived carrying large and small bundles on their backs, including Clara. There were 10 in total, 7 boys and 3 girls. Seeing that everyone had arrived, I was about to close the gate when suddenly, a heavy palm smacked against the door. Mr. Grant, the butcher next door, appeared in the doorway. His fierce-looking face bore an awkward expression. In his left hand, he dragged along a chubby little boy who was grinning ingratiatingly. "Nin girl," he said, clearing his throat, "I know I'm just a crude butcher. I'm not a learned man. In the past. Don't hold it against me, will you? Why don't you teach my boy as well?" The moment he finished speaking, Mr. Grant shoved the chubby child forward. I accepted him cheerfully. Seeing that I did not refuse, Mr. Grant hurriedly stuffed a chunk of pork into his son's hands and barked, "What are you standing there for? Hurry and greet the teacher properly. Get into class. Move those legs." As he spoke, he knocked the boy lightly on the head, and just like that, 11 students sat neatly in rows and began their path of learning. At that time, I had no idea that Three Mountains School would gradually expand. That one day it would become Three Mountains Academy. That the academy would nurture countless outstanding students, some entering officialdom, some thriving in commerce, some becoming teachers themselves. Their disciples would spread across the land, their influence reaching far and wide throughout the dynasty. Each day, the clear sound of reading drifted from the courtyard. It crossed over the fences, floated through the village, carried across the rice fields. Passers-by would pause, listening, peering curiously inside. Thus, the name of Three Mountains School began to spread. Village headman Harris brought his own son to enroll. Looking at the restored school, so much like it had been when Master Vaughn was still alive, he said to me with heartfelt emotion, "Nin girl, you are a good child." That young man truly had no eyes. My father had once been close with the village headman, so he spoke without reservation. I, however, felt as though he had brushed against an old wound. I merely smiled and did not respond. Unexpectedly, he later introduced me to the children of Mr. Harrison, a wealthy merchant in the city. Ordinarily, someone of Mr. Harrison's standing would never send his children to a small village school like mine. But the village headman happened to be distantly related to his family. One evening, over drinks, Mr. Harrison mentioned he was seeking a capable tutor for his children. Who would have thought the village headman, slightly drunk, would slap the table and declare, "Why search elsewhere? The best teacher is right at your doorstep." The very next day, he brought Mr. Harrison to my home. I later heard that Mr. Harrison had been skeptical at first, suspecting he had been misled in his drunken state. He stood outside my gate for quite some time, unwilling to enter. As it happened, I was inside teaching the Analects, to know what you know, and to know what you do not know, that is knowledge. Who can explain this sentence? I asked. Gavin Grant, the butcher's son, shot his hand into the air eagerly. Gavin, go ahead. The boy stood up straight, hands at his sides, and answered in a clear voice. Teacher explained yesterday that it means, what you know, you admit you know, what you don't know, you admit you don't know. Speaking truthfully like this is wisdom. I smiled. Gavin is correct. However, today I wish to add one more point. To know what you know and admit what you do not know is indeed good. But one must not remain stagnant. If you recognize your ignorance yet refuse to study diligently, if you become idle and complacent, that is not wisdom. Knowledge in this world is boundless. We must actively seek it. Not only you, Gavin, have all of you understood? The children responded in unison, their voices ringing out, we understand. Thank you, teacher. Looking at their orderly, serious expressions, I could hardly believe these were the same children who once ran wild in the fields, shouting and fighting. Joy welled within me. It was then that I saw village headman Harris leading an elderly gentleman inside. The man wore a warm smile. That gentleman was Mr. Harrison. The village headman asked with a laugh, "Hey, little fatty, why did you change your name?" Gavin had originally been called Little Fatty, a name his father had given him casually. But after hearing the meaning behind Clara Vaughan's name, he had gone home and insisted upon changing his own. Mr. Grant had come to my door afterward, stammering awkwardly, scratching his head, finally explaining his intention. After some thought, I renamed the boy Gavin Grant, Nien, meaning to study and remember. I hoped he would love learning, become accomplished, understand both ancient and modern wisdom. And if one day he rose to prominence, he would not forget his parents' and teachers' kindness. Mr. Grant had been exceedingly pleased. Every few days, he would quietly bring meat and wine to my house. Now, hearing the explanation, village headman Harris and Mr. Harrison nodded in approval. The next day, the school gained 2 more students, the son and daughter of Mr. Harrison. Not only that, Mr. Harrison recommended my school to his relatives and neighbors. It was something I had never anticipated. Gradually, word spread. In Willow Leaf Village there was a school called 3 Mountains. There was a teacher known as the 3 Mountains teacher. She was learned and understood propriety. No matter how mischievous the children sent to her were, they would leave disciplined and studious. 3 Mountains was a name I chose myself. When fortune arrives, it cannot be stopped. More and more students came, some even the children of officials within and beyond the city. The original school grounds soon became insufficient. Now that I was no longer short of money, I hired workers to expand the courtyard, erect new shelters connected to the old yard to serve as classrooms. I employed a female cook and a helper to manage daily chores. In the blink of an eye, half a year passed. One day, when the school was closed, a visitor dressed in purple robes appeared at my door. His features were sharp and striking, handsome in a way that stood out among the vast mountains and rivers of the world. Once seen, he would not easily be forgotten, yet between his brows lay a stern, cold reserve that made him difficult to approach. The moment I saw him, I knew this man was no ordinary person, and he had not come with simple intentions. Sure enough, when he spoke and revealed his purpose, I was not pleased in the slightest. He said there were several children in his household who were especially fond of reading. By chance, they had heard that in Willow Leaf Village there was a certain 3 Mountains teacher, renowned in the city for profound learning. Thus, he wished to invite me to his residence to focus exclusively on teaching them. The tuition he offered was exceedingly generous. 1 month's payment would equal the entire annual income of 3 Mountains School, and yet, I refused. First, I could not abandon the students already studying here for the sake of profit. Second, I had now established a firm standing in Willow Leaf Village. There were still many plans awaiting me. If I were to leave as a guest tutor in some noble household, all those plans would collapse. Third, I had grown accustomed to the freedom here. If I entered the residence of an aristocratic family, every step would be bound by rigid etiquette. It would surely be stifling. Worse still, I might encounter Princess Eleanor and Julian Pay. That was something I had no desire for, so I declined politely. He seemed genuinely surprised that I would refuse such wealth laid plainly before me. He stared at me for a long moment before suddenly breaking into a smile. It seems I have underestimated you, teacher. The smile lightened his earlier scrutiny. His tone grew more courteous as he explained, it was actually the children at home. After hearing of your reputation, they pestered me endlessly, insisting I personally come to Willow Leaf Village to invite you as a guest. If I return unsuccessful, I fear this uncle will have no peace. After that, I saw him several more times. Each time, he stood beneath the willow tree outside the academy, arms folded across his chest, eyes closed, leaning against the trunk, as though listening intently to the sound of my lessons drifting from within. After witnessing this repeatedly, I invited him inside for tea. He praised it lightly. The tea is refreshing. The aftertaste lingers. I exposed his polite falsehood. It is rustic village tea. Bitter and coarse. Those peach blossom eyes sparkled as he stared at me, then suddenly laughed, pointing as he sighed, You truly. At the time, I did not know his identity. Nor did he volunteer it. There is a saying, the friendship of gentlemen is as light as water. It means a bond pure and unadorned, without flattery or excess. True friendship, like still water, calm, harmonious, sincere. Who would have thought that through a few cups of bitter tea, he and I would become something like old acquaintances? Inwardly, I thought that regardless of status, having someone with whom one could converse openly was no bad thing. I never imagined that such harmony might one day shatter, that once again, would be forced to bow my head before fate. In the city, there was a long-established school called Diligent Study School. Founded over a decade ago by an elderly provincial graduate surnamed Quill. It had once been extremely renowned. After the old scholar's death, his son, Howard Quill, inherited the school. For reasons unknown, in recent years its reputation had waned. The number of enrolling students declined noticeably. Meanwhile, Three Mountain School was gradually gaining prominence. Some students from Diligent Study transferred here. Upon learning of this, Howard Quill came directly to my door, seeing that I was merely a female teacher, and that I even kept Clara by my side. His expression immediately turned contemptuous. A woman like you, he sneered, probably can't even write your own name properly. Opening a school, aren't you misleading children? My household happens to lack a concubine. Why not come with me and be my 8th concubine? Warming my bed at night would suit you better. The attendant beside him eagerly echoed, Yes, yes, master speaks wisely. Young lady, come be our 8th concubine. Afterward, Three Mountain School can be handed over to our master. The two of them exchanged lewd laughter. Classes had not yet dismissed. The students were still inside, my hands clenched until my teeth nearly ground together. I was considering how best to deal with these two when suddenly, from behind me came a furious shout. I turned. Clara stood there, gripping a large stick. Behind her trailed several students in a line. Some held burning firewood from the stove, Some clutched cucumbers or cabbages. With all the strength they could muster, they charged forward. How dare you bully our teacher? Beat them. Drive them out. Bad people. Get out. It happened too quickly. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Firewood flew. Vegetables scattered. The children, united as one, pummeled the two men relentlessly. Howard Quill and his servant fled in disgrace. Even as they ran, they turned back to shout vicious threats. You little bastards. Just wait. I'll make you pay dearly for this. At once, an uneasy premonition settled over me. That evening, Clara came to me quietly. Teacher. Did I cause trouble for you today? Looking at her small, anxious face, I could not bear to scold her. If it is fortune, it is not disaster. If it is disaster, it cannot be avoided, I said softly. Clara, you were indeed impulsive today. But you were not wrong. It is I who failed to consider matters thoroughly. A tall tree inevitably meets strong winds. Some storms cannot be avoided, no matter how we try. The day disaster struck, I had just finished teaching. The children were packing up and heading home one after another. Clara was about to close the gates when suddenly a group of fierce constables shoved the doors open and stormed inside. With a loud shout, they accused us of hiding forbidden books in the academy. Without another word, they seized me and dragged me away. I was too stunned to speak. According to the laws of the great empire, possession of banned texts was punishable by exile. Thousands of miles into desolation, the academy was sealed on the spot. I only had time to tell Clara one thing: don't be afraid. Stay home and wait for me. Then I was taken away, at that moment. Even I did not know whether I would ever return. The prison of the Court of Judicial Review was darker, damper, and filthier than I had imagined. The corridor was paved with narrow, endless bricks. The ground was wet beneath my feet. The air reeked of rot and blood. Only a faint, sickly light filtered in from somewhere unseen. The jailer shoved me into a solitary cell. A mere girl dares to hide forbidden books? Stay in there and wait. If you've got the nerve to do it, you've got the nerve to take the punishment. They had found a Western Rome manuscript in the academy. The book was banned because it recorded the 10-year war between the Western Rome forces and the Empire's army. But I knew perfectly well, there was no such book in my school. If one were to ask where it came from, there could only be one answer. The constables had taken advantage of the chaos and slipped it in themselves. Some time after I was imprisoned, Howard Quill came to see me. He stood outside the cell and said smugly, "Well? Regret it now? Your old master will give you one more chance. Agree to become my 8th concubine, and I'll find a way to get you out." I spat at him. You shameless dog. A man like you dares call himself a teacher? The academy you inherited will close sooner or later. He flew into a rage and tried to rush in to strike me, but the jailer was standing nearby. He could only storm off in fury. That was when I learned there was also a Quill serving in the Court of Judicial Review, Deputy Minister Quill. And Howard Quill was his nephew. At night, the prison howled with cries. The stench of blood thickened in the air. Rats ran rampant, scurrying back and forth as if the place belonged to them. One even boldly gnawed at my toe. I leaned against the wall, drifting in and out of sleep. Then the jailer came on patrol with several men. The cell door was struck. I looked up to see him staring down at me. The corners of his eyes were vicious, reflecting the flickering torchlight, like the rat that had chewed at me earlier. "In this place," he said slowly, you follow our rules. I hear you're a teacher. Surely you understand that much. Behind him, the other jailers exchanged leering smiles. I thought for a moment. When I was arrested, I hadn't had time to bring silver or valuables. The only thing on me was a jade hairpin worth a few coins. I removed it and handed it over. This is all I have. Only when I stepped closer did I realize the jailer looked vaguely familiar. But I could not immediately recall where I had seen him. He took the jade hairpin, examined it under the light, and narrowed his eyes with a cold smile. Worth a few taels. Consider it your entrance gift. Then he swaggered off with the others. I did not expect that the hairpin would leave my hands for only a single night, before returning to me the very next day. The following morning, I was awakened by crying. The sobs were close, so close it sounded as if someone were being beaten. I thought someone had been tortured and dragged back. Frightened, I opened my eyes. Instead, I saw a stout woman standing outside my cell, hands on her hips. Under her foot was a man, and the man she was stepping on was the very jailer who had taught me the rules the night before. "You ungrateful bastard!" she shouted. "Serena Vaughn of the Tam Sun Academy has shown our family great kindness. Have you forgotten? You even dared to take the teacher's belongings? You wretch! Today I'll beat you to death. Madam! Mercy, madam! Your husband didn't recognize her." I truly didn't. I had just woken up and witnessed this scene. For a moment, I could only stare in shock. Then I finally remembered why the jailer had seemed familiar. When the academy had first begun to gain some reputation, a woman surnamed Shu had once come seeking admission for her son. That woman was now Madam Sunday. Back then, her clothes were worn and patched. Her face looked exhausted, haggard from hardship. Nothing like the spirited, radiant figure before me now. She had spoken timidly. "Our family truly cannot afford the tuition," she had said, "but I cannot bear to delay my son's education any longer. I beg you to accept him. Once we earn more money, I will repay you double." Her son was Thomas Sunday. He wore patched clothes. His small hands clutched tightly at his mother's hem. He looked up at me with a round, earnest face. I took his hand from his mother's and led him inside. In my heart I thought, teaching one more child is still teaching. What difference does it make? Less than 3 months later, Madam's son returned with double the tuition, thanking me again and again, insisting I accept it. I took only the proper amount and told her to bring the rest home. Yesterday, when I was arrested and brought to the Court of Judicial Review, Thomas' son had only just left the academy. The boy was clever. The moment he sensed something was wrong, he ran home and told his mother everything. And that was how this scene came to be. And so, at first light, Madam's son had stormed straight to the prison of the Court of Judicial Review to settle accounts. The moment Warden's son saw his wife arrive, he hurriedly produced the jade hairpin he had taken from me, offering it to her in an attempt to curry favor. He had not expected her face to turn deathly pale the instant she understood the whole story. Without hesitation, she rolled up her sleeves and slapped him across the face, hard. Then she charged straight into the prison. That was how it happened. Warden's son, his face swollen and bruised, covered his cheek and spoke to me in shame. "Teacher." This lowly one was blind and failed to recognize a benefactor. "I even dared to accept your gift. Please do not blame me. This hairpin is returned to you. As long as old son is here, no one in this prison will dare bully you again. I beg the teacher to forgive me." From that day on, my life in prison became far more bearable. Warden's son arranged for people to disinfect the cell, spray medicine, and clean it thoroughly. He brought bedding prepared by Madame Sunday. The daily meals no longer stank but were replaced with hot food. With hands clasped, he said to me, "Teacher, forgive me. This is all I can do for you." I was deeply grateful. For someone in his position, he had already done all he could. In the cell opposite mine was a child, not yet 10 years old. One day, while chatting, I learned he had been imprisoned for theft. "Why did you steal?" I asked. "If I had money," he replied. "Who would want to steal?" After a pause, he asked me, "I heard you're a lady teacher. Could you teach me how to read?" "Why do you want to learn?" I asked. "Someday I'll get out," he said. "When that day comes, I don't want to be a thief chased and beaten anymore. I want to work." I heard that even waiters in taverns nowadays need to know some characters and arithmetic before the owner will hire them. Learning those things is useful. But I don't know anything at all. He lowered his head as he finished speaking. From then on, I began teaching him arithmetic. It did not take long for me to realize that in the past, he had stood outside the academy walls, secretly listening in on lessons. So it became this. I taught from one side, he learned from the other. I asked Warden's son to bring him a small wooden stick. With it, he wrote and drew all day long. Before long, the floor and 3 walls of his cell were covered in characters and numbers. The other jailers, out of respect for Warden's son, turned a blind eye. When my throat grew dry from speaking too long, someone would thoughtfully bring me water. Life was no longer unbearable. The child was remarkably clever and quick-witted. It did not take him long to master arithmetic. Forget being a waiter, he could even manage as a shop clerk. One day he waved his arms excitedly and said to me, "Then in the future I'll become a shop manager. I won't be a waiter anymore." I told him gently, "Learning arithmetic will help you become a manager. But to truly manage a shop, knowing numbers alone is not enough." He looked at me in confusion, so I began teaching him other things, from the 3-character classic to the 1,000-character essay, from the standards for students to the Analects. Because our cells were separated by a corridor and walls, he could only chant after me from afar. His voice, slow, deliberate, soft, stretched each word carefully into the air. Unknowingly, I discovered that the surrounding prisoners had begun to follow along as well. I did not stop them. After all, who in this world would prevent someone from wanting to learn? At first, they read in chaos. Some pronunciations were wildly incorrect. It felt like ducks and chickens arguing in different tongues. But patience was the one thing I had in abundance. Gradually, they improved. Their voices became clearer, more fluent, louder, echoing in all directions. Sometimes I could even hear the sound reverberate back. The entire prison, by word of mouth, had transformed into a most unusual academy. It was something I had never imagined. At first, the jailers stared at one another in disbelief. But over time, even they could not resist sitting down to listen. Warden's son laughed. "These jailers are all rough fellows. Who would have thought they'd one day sit and hear a teacher lecture?" That day, I was explaining a passage. The gentleman seeks within himself, the petty man seeks in others. A true gentleman reflects upon his own faults and corrects himself. A petty man blames others for his failures. As I spoke, I saw Warden's son rushing toward me in panic. "Teacher, an imperial decree has arrived." When I stepped into the hall of diligent governance, my heart pounded like a drum in my chest. The decree stated that His Majesty the Emperor had heard rumors that a school had been opened inside the prison of the Court of Judicial Review. Astonished, he insisted on meeting the teacher responsible. Poor me, having been locked in prison for so long, how could I have known that the reading voices inside had grown so loud? From within the court, the sound had spread outward. Passers-by stopped to listen, intrigued by the novelty. Before long, word of it spread throughout the city. Storytellers even turned it into a tale, performing it in taverns. I heard those taverns were soon filled to the brim, bringing both the owners and storytellers considerable profit. Then, like thunder striking before one could cover one's ears, the matter reached the palace, faster even than it reached the officials within the court itself, and so this imperial decree came to be. His Majesty asked me why I had been imprisoned. I answered calmly, "Your Majesty, I was told it was because this common woman was found to be in possession of a forbidden book." His Majesty fell silent for a long moment. "And what do you mean by that?" he asked at last. "Are you saying you do not even know what crime you committed?" His voice was clear and majestic, imposing beyond measure. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. I forced myself to inhale slowly and replied, "Your Majesty, it is true. This common woman does not know what crime she has committed. As for that forbidden book, where it came from, I have no knowledge of it. I had decided that since I had been granted an audience with the Son of Heaven, I must seize this chance to clear my name. I had been imprisoned for over a month. Logically speaking, for a crime so grave, I should have been dragged out and interrogated long ago. Yet no one had come. I had already guessed that something must have gone wrong for the person manipulating matters behind the scenes. Sure enough, His Majesty summoned the Minister of the Court of Judicial Review. The minister stepped forward and reported that the case file had been submitted to higher authorities half a month ago. The evidence, he claimed, was complete. He further stated that I had already been interrogated and had confessed. However, when he examined the so-called forbidden book, he discovered that its cover was still brand new, so new it seemed never to have been opened. There were no annotations, no marks of reading. It was as pristine as a freshly printed volume. Suspicion arose in his heart. He had therefore set the matter aside temporarily and ordered his subordinates to investigate again. But before he received any reply, he had been summoned into the palace. After listening, His Majesty ordered the book to be brought forward. He flipped through it once, fell into brief contemplation, then waved his hand for the minister to withdraw, and instructed that I be returned to custody. The minister personally escorted me back to the prison. He glanced at my cell but offered no particular instructions. "Wait there," he said simply. "Do not be anxious." The next time I entered the palace, my name had already been cleared. The Chinchua Academy was shut down. Howard Quill was imprisoned for multiple crimes: bullying commoners in broad daylight, bribing others to frame innocent people, and numerous other offenses. He was thrown into jail to await execution. Deputy Minister Quill of the Court of Judicial Review was dismissed from office and detained pending investigation. His Majesty then asked me, "I have heard that in prison you taught them, the gentleman seeks within himself, the petty man seeks in others. Do you think they understood?" I replied, "Your Majesty, whether one understands does not depend on whether the listener is a prisoner or not. It depends on whether the listener is willing to understand. There are those outside prison who commit evil without restraint. There are those inside prison who possess kindness and integrity. The difference between a gentleman and a petty man does not lie in his environment. A gentleman is strict with himself and lenient with others. A petty man does the opposite." The grand hall fell into silence. After a long while, a clear voice rang out, "Good." Only then did I quietly release the breath I had been holding. I had passed this trial. His Majesty asked again, "Are you willing to remain in the palace as a female official and instruct the 9th princess in her studies?" As I hesitated, uncertain whether to decline directly or gently, I heard an announcement: "The heir apparent of Prince Cheng has arrived." I was about to step aside when a pair of boots stopped directly before me. Then came a voice, steady and clear as polished jade, achingly familiar. "Why are you here?" I looked up. Was this not the old friend I had made over cups of bitter tea? So he was Adrian Vale, the heir apparent of Prince Cheng. I had once speculated about his identity, but never had I imagined he belonged to the imperial clan. His Majesty asked, "What is the matter, 13th brother?" Adrian remained composed. Only then did he bow properly before His Majesty. He slowly recounted how we had come to know each other. It turned out that a month ago, his grandfather had passed away after a serious illness. The Prince Cheng Manor had been in mourning. He had been occupied the entire month and only recently found time to go out. He had known nothing of what had happened at Three Mountains Academy. His attitude remained cool and reserved. His Majesty did not rebuke him, as though accustomed to it. I could not help but feel astonished. Then His Majesty said to me, "Previously, 13th brother went in my stead to invite you into the palace as a guest. You refused. Today I speak plainly. I wish for you to remain and teach the princess. Will you still refuse?" Startled, I quickly knelt. "Your Majesty, your discernment is wise. To be permitted to instruct the princess would be an immense honor. However, my aspirations do not lie here. I beg your Majesty's forgiveness." I continued, "This common woman wishes to teach many people, not to be the private teacher of only one." His Majesty struck the armrest of the dragon throne lightly. "Why not say you wish to be the teacher of 10,000? Would a mere 1,000 satisfy you?" I bowed even lower. 10,000 is too many. This common woman does not dare claim such worth. I beg your Majesty's understanding." He was silent for a long time before speaking again. A woman with ambition, yet who knows when to advance and when to retreat. If half my ministers were like you, what would I have to worry about? In the end, His Majesty granted me 1,000 taels of gold and permitted me to leave the palace. When I stepped out of the great hall, my feet felt as though they were walking upon clouds. Adrian Vale walked beside me, clicking his tongue twice. "A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you let it slip away." I turned to him. "What did your Highness say?" Those lively peach blossom eyes blinked at me, playing the hero to save the beauty. I said nothing. The corner of my mouth twitched slightly. He did not mind. He simply laughed, clasped his hands behind his back, and strode ahead. "Come. I'll see you out." Who would have thought that, just as we reached the palace gates, I ran into someone I had not seen in a very long time, Julian Pei. He was dressed in the official robes of a fourth-rank court official, evidently preparing to enter the palace for an audience with His Majesty. Fourth rank. Some men spent their entire lives clawing their way upward and never reached such a position. Yet for him, it had taken only a single step. That was the advantage of becoming an imperial son-in-law. The moment he saw me, he stopped short, shock flooding his face. "Ninger? Why are you here?" Before I could answer, Adrian Vale spoke first. "Ninger?" Julian's gaze shifted toward him, then back to me. "You know each other?" I answered evenly, "We are not acquainted." Then I turned and walked away without another word. The moment I returned home, Clara Vaughn rushed into my arms and burst into tears. In the end, she was still a child, not yet 10 years old. Between sobs she asked, "Sister, what will we do from now on?" Truthfully, I had already thought everything through on the way back. My name had been cleared. The seal on Three Mountains Academy had been removed. And unexpectedly, His Majesty had rewarded me with a generous sum of gold. I had long had plans to expand the academy, but until now my funds had only been enough to add perhaps one or two small courtyards nearby. Today, I finally had sufficient capital. I intended to purchase the stretch of land at the foot of the mountain. Three Mountains Academy bore its name because it was surrounded on three sides by mountains, with only one side facing the stream. Upon closer consideration, it was truly an excellent location. Clara's eyes immediately lit up. She clapped excitedly, then suddenly stopped, staring over my shoulder. I turned. Adrian Vale stood at the gate, lazily fanning himself, a smug smile playing on his lips. Had we not parted ways already? Why was he here? Before I could ask, he snapped his fan shut and stepped inside. What good news? I asked cautiously. Didn't you just say you're going to expand the academy? He replied. If that's not good news, what is? It was good news for me, certainly. But for him, he glanced around the courtyard and continued, the Prince Ching Manor has skilled craftsmen, house artisans, very experienced. Reliable and trustworthy. Tomorrow I'll send them over. They'll follow your instructions. I stared at him. Skilled craftsmen from the prince's estate. Servants of the manor. Placed at my disposal, such help was beyond anything I could have hoped for. I hurriedly thanked him and asked, and the wages? Shall we follow the standard market rate, or add a little extra? His eyes glimmered as he looked at me. After a moment, he smiled. Market rate will do. I quietly let out a breath of relief. Had he said no payment was needed, or offered a discount, I would have had no choice but to decline tactfully. In this world, the hardest debts to repay are favors. Some matters are best settled with money. The next day, just as promised, a group of carpenters arrived, bringing with them a preliminary architectural draft. When I saw it, I was astonished. Only then did I learn that Adrian had stayed up the entire night drawing it himself. After observing the grounds, he had returned home and drafted the design from memory. It was nothing short of genius. I held the blueprint as though it were a priceless treasure. Thus began the grand expansion of Three Mountains Academy. During this time, former students, upon hearing that I had returned, came back one after another. Even as construction began, lessons could not be delayed. The small courtyard fell within the renovation zone, so I erected temporary awnings nearby and continued teaching there. The villagers learned of our plans and came in droves to help. Urgu's father, Juzi's father, and Mr. Grant the butcher all lent a hand. Each day after selling pork, Mr. Grant would rush straight over, roll up his sleeves, and begin working. As long as I think about my son studying in a school I helped build, he declared, I'm more excited than when I slaughter pigs. The entire expansion proceeded in a wave of enthusiasm. I invited the cook back. Mrs. Lawson and the village women prepared meals and carried water for the carpenters. Once the cooking was done, they returned home to weave handicrafts for sale, earning extra income in the process. Everyone was delighted. Before long, the academy began to take shape. I could almost see it already. Thousands of students studying here one day. But just when spirits were highest, when no one could have imagined disaster, a single, sudden fire reduced all our efforts to ashes. That night, the air was stiflingly hot. Clara and I were half asleep when she suddenly bolted upright. Sister, I smell something strange. Like something burning. I inhaled sharply. Kerosene. We rushed outside. Behind the grain storage shed, flames were roaring skyward. Heat blasted against our faces. Several figures dressed in black were scrambling over the wall, attempting to flee. Clara screamed at the top of her lungs, fire. Fire. Thieves. Uncles. Catch them. Her voice carried for miles. Neighbors came running, buckets and sticks in hand. Mr. Grant charged forward, gripping his pig-slaughtering cleaver, roaring as he confronted a black-clad man vaulting the courtyard wall. The two clashed in several exchanges. Some people fought the fire. Others pursued the intruders. Those men had come armed with blades, clearly prepared for violence. When they were surrounded by the villagers, the men in black originally intended to fight back and carve out a path of escape. But they were stopped by the group of carpenters who had stayed the night on the grounds. Who would have thought that the carpenters from the Prince Cheng's manor all knew martial arts? Not only that, their movements were swift and precise. In no time, the intruders were subdued. The villagers crowded around them, tore off their black outer garments, ripped away their masks, beat their faces until they were swollen and bruised, then tied them up tightly. One of the carpenters quickly mounted a horse and galloped into the city to report the matter to Adrian Vale. It was not long before he arrived. By then, the fire had not yet been completely extinguished. I was still clutching a wooden bucket, exhausted, gasping for breath. My face was smeared black with soot. Adrian strode toward me. He looked at me for a moment, then took out a spotless white silk handkerchief from his sleeve and gently wiped the grime from my face. After that, he stuffed the handkerchief into my hand and walked toward the men who were bound. Who would have expected that with just one glance he would smile? These men look rather familiar. The black-clad men seemed to recognize him as well. One after another, they lowered their heads. It turned out they were the personal guards of Princess Eleanor. They had acted under her orders to set fire to the academy and destroy it. Adrian had them taken away under escort. Before leaving, he said coldly, "Watch how this air strips her bare and lets you use her as a cushion." The next day, news spread that the princess's residence had caught fire. The blaze raged for an entire day and night before it was finally extinguished. People said Princess Eleanor's estate had been burned beyond recognition. The quarters where the princess and her consort usually resided were the worst affected, burned clean, leaving nothing behind. It was also said that Princess Eleanor had suffered burns on her face. No one knew whether scars would remain. When I heard this news, I was standing before the charred remains of the academy. Blackened ruins stretched in every direction. Nothing was left. In my mind, I wondered where justice could possibly be sought now. Later, Adrian told me that Princess Eleanor's estate occupied half a street. He had been afraid the fire might spread to the neighboring noble households. Otherwise, the flames would not have been extinguished so quickly. When he said this, his peach blossom eyes were still faintly red, his anger clearly not yet spent. The matter eventually caused such an uproar that it reached His Majesty the Emperor. Princess Eleanor, unable to find the hidden mastermind behind the retaliation, went crying before the dragon throne, pouring out her grievances. But as a result, all the misdeeds she had committed in the past were dragged into the light one by one. His Majesty learned of Julian Pei's background, and of the past between Julian Pei and me. For a time, everything became a sensation, whether in court or among the common people. Everyone was speaking of the love triangle between me, Julian Pei, and Princess Eleanor. The Emperor felt he had utterly lost face. He summoned me into the palace. If I ordered Duanhe to divorce her consort, he asked, and allow you to fulfill your late father's final wish, would you be willing? At that time, Princess Eleanor, Julian Pei, and Adrian Vale were all present. The right side of the princess's face was wrapped in white bandages. It seemed the rumors were indeed true. I said, "Your Majesty, Lord Pei and Princess Eleanor are already husband and wife. While my father lived, he always hoped that his daughter would possess virtue and self-respect. Therefore, This humble woman will never commit an immoral act by destroying another's marriage. After a slight pause, I added, moreover, I do not like using things that others have already used. Especially not men. When I finished speaking, the expressions in the grand hall were truly spectacular. Princess Eleanor and Julian Pay both turned pale. The princess was furious that I had insulted her virtue. As for Julian Pay, perhaps he was angry as well. After all, I had mocked him as a second-hand object. Only Adrian Vale stood there laughing, completely unconcerned. He laughed until even the emperor could not bear it anymore. If you laugh again, His Majesty said, I will have someone stitch your mouth shut. Do you believe me? Only then did Adrian stop, yet his eyes, when they looked at me, still shone brilliantly. I truly did not understand what had him so delighted. The emperor spoke sternly, but beneath his words lay indulgence and helplessness. There was no real intention of sewing Adrian's mouth shut. During this time, I finally came to understand why Adrian Vale was so favored. It turned out that Prince Cheng, his father, was a sworn brother of the emperor and had saved His Majesty's life several times. From the time Adrian was born, he had spent half his childhood at the emperor's side. His temperament and bearing did not resemble Prince Cheng much, rather, he was very much like the emperor in his youth. For that reason, the emperor treated him like his own son, perhaps even more indulgently than his own flesh and blood. Because I insisted, Julian Pay retained his position as the princess's consort. However, his path of official promotion was affected. The emperor said only one sentence to him, what use is reading so many books, if you are ungrateful and faithless? Your virtue does not match your rank. Julian Pay trembled as if he might collapse. He nearly fell flat onto the floor. From that moment on, his official career was essentially hopeless, and yet, I found no joy in it. My academy had been reduced to ashes. Of the 1,000 taels of gold, little remained. Where was I to find enough money to rebuild? But then, who could have expected? The emperor directly decreed that Princess Eleanor must compensate me with 2,000 taels of gold. My eyes nearly doubled in brightness, and His Majesty added one more sentence. Duanha must personally deliver it to Willow Leaf Village, into the hands of Master Three Mountains. Father Emperor. Princess Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief, her body went limp, and she collapsed to the ground. Behind her, Julian Pay stood stiff and frozen. He had only just recovered from the emperor's reprimand and did not even manage to reach out in time to catch her, letting her fall to the ground. I glanced at Adrian Vale, who stood to one side without saying a word, yet it was obvious. He was in an excellent mood. Who did not know that when His Majesty favored someone, he favored them completely? These 2,000 taels of gold amounted to nearly half the wealth of the princess's estate. When Princess Eleanor personally brought the gold and placed it into my hands, she was still grinding her teeth, her expression one of barely restrained hatred, as though she wished she could tear a piece of flesh from my body. She could not even pretend otherwise. The white bandage on her face had already been removed. Her skin was smooth and flawless, without the slightest scar. The medicine of the imperial palace was indeed miraculous. She let out a cold laugh. Do not think this princess does not know that the fire that night had something to do with you. You are truly bold, daring to set fire to a princess's residence. She knew who had truly set the fire, but she did not dare provoke that person, so she chose to settle the score with me instead. I looked at her, feigning righteous indignation, and did not pursue the matter further. Instead, I said lightly, these 2,000 taels of gold may be considered the purchase price of Lord Pay. What does your highness think? She glared at me. You. The corners of my lips curved slightly. Your highness need not be angry. Think of it, Lord Pei is the top scholar of his year, and also the princess's consort, the assistant minister of revenue. 2,000 taels of gold for such a man. Your Highness has not suffered any loss. Unable to gain the upper hand in words, Princess Eleanor huffed angrily and flicked her sleeve before leaving, and with her money, I rebuilt the Three Mountains Academy. Not only rebuilt it, but made it grander than before. At the same time, I posted notices at the outer gate inviting students to enroll, and began recruiting teachers. This matter went more smoothly than I had imagined previously. In the Hall of Diligent Governance, His Majesty had first invited me to remain in the palace to teach the 9th princess. Later, he had praised me for being resolute and broad-minded, knowing when to advance and when to retreat, never breaking propriety. Those words spread far and wide and became my banner. Moreover, the story of my teaching in the prison of the Court of Judicial Review had also circulated long ago, turning into something of a folk legend, retold by everyone, and before I even realized it, the name Master Three Mountains had become famous throughout the realm. Thus, during this period, countless students came seeking instruction. Willow Leaf Village had never been so lively and bustling. I had scarcely finished seeing one person out the gate when two more would step in. Adrian was still in mourning for his father. Seeing me so busy that my feet barely touched the ground, he decisively ordered guards to block the entrance to the village. Anyone who was not a villager was forbidden from entering. I finally breathed a sigh of relief, yet at the same time, I discovered that the crowd gathered outside the village gate had grown even larger than before. To avoid exhausting myself to death, I posted another notice at the entrance, tactfully explaining that during this period I was occupied with rebuilding the academy and temporarily unable to receive visitors. Once the academy was complete, all would be welcome to attend the opening ceremony. Only then did they gradually disperse and return home. Meanwhile, the reputation of Willow Leaf Village spread even farther. The villagers felt immensely proud that such a grand academy stood within their village, attracting scholars from everywhere, as though the once ordinary village had become extraordinary overnight. Chizzy clapped loudly and shouted, "I know! I know! This is called the terrace by the water gets the moonlight first. It means when one person becomes an official, the whole family benefits. Mother, soon I'll be studying in the big academy." "Me too. Me too." Ergo chimed in, jumping up and down, his face glowing with excitement, only to be smacked lightly on the backside by his mother. "Stand properly. Master is watching." I could not help but laugh. Many years later, people would all know that in Willow Leaf Village there stood an academy called Three Mountains Academy. It was a place of learning for those with great ambition, the sacred ground of an entire dynasty. On the day the Three Mountains Academy was completed, His Majesty bestowed upon it a plaque inscribed with 4 characters, "A bright mirror for all ages." The calligraphy was bold and vigorous. The wooden frame was inlaid with silver. It had been written by the emperor himself. I understood that this was a reminder, never to forget what I had said that day in the Hall of Diligent Governance, and so I hung the plaque inside Mingda Hall, treating it as the guiding principle of the entire Three Mountains Academy. Mingda Hall, true to its name, was specially built for future generations of students as a place to cultivate virtue. It was also the largest lecture hall in the entire academy. In the general regulations of the disciples of Three Mountains Academy, the very first rule I established was this: on the first day of every month, all students and teachers of the academy must gather in Mingda Hall and spend 1 hour studying moral principles. For the ultimate aim of learning is this single word: virtue. The example of Julian Pei had taught me that lesson deeply. If you possess moral character, you will forever be a person of true learning. I hoped that in the future, Every student who stepped out from Three Mountains Academy would be a person of outstanding virtue, capable, accomplished, and refined. Later, an uninvited guest came to the academy. It was the child I had once taught inside the prison. He had been released that day. At that time, the academy was filled with the sound of students reciting their lessons, their voices even and orderly, drifting outward from the halls. The boy clasped his hands behind his back and tilted his face up to look at me, smiling shyly. Yet it seemed as though he were trying to muster courage for himself. His voice rose unconsciously, becoming louder and firmer. "Master, you once said that after I was released, I could come and find you." Of course I remember. That was the second time His Majesty had summoned me. Deep in my heart, I knew that after that visit, I would not be returning to the prison again. Before I left, I said to the child, "You still haven't told me your name. But I can tell you mine. My name is Serena Vaughn. I live at Three Mountains. After you are released, if you still wish to study, come to Three Mountains Academy in Willow Leaf Village outside the city and look for me. Now, can you tell me your name?" I smiled at him gently. He stammered, "Master, I don't have a name. Before my father died, he only ever called me a mongrel." I fell silent. That day, when I had asked for his name and he refused to say it, so that was the reason. I did not wish to reopen his wounds. "You are already 10 years old. Just the right age to enter the intermediate class. Come, I'll take you to meet the others." The child's eyes lit up. He wiped his hands nervously against his clothes before reaching out to take mine. I brought him to meet Teacher Lee, who would be responsible for his lessons from now on. I also introduced him to Clara Vaughn. They were close in age, and Clara was lively and bright by nature. I believed the two of them would get along easily. The boy's surname was Yang. I gave him the name Yang Huiran, to cherish benevolence. I hoped that even though he had struggled to survive since childhood, he would still preserve a compassionate heart, and not, because he had suffered, turn around and vent his bitterness upon others. When I gave him this name, his delicate face lifted toward me, his eyes steady and resolute. "Master, Huiran will remember it. When Huiran grows up, I will certainly become a good man. I will never forget Master's teachings for the rest of my life." Looking into those clear eyes, mine suddenly grew warm and damp. Perhaps because he had matured too early, he understood the principles of this world all the more clearly. Julian Pei came once. By then, he had been demoted 3 ranks to left assistant minister. Even the bearing about him seemed diminished by half. He stood before the plaque of Mingda Hall, heavy and radiant, and smiled faintly, sadly. "Ning, if I said I regret it now, would you believe me?" I answered, "You regret it. But you cannot turn back." At those words, he staggered back a step. "In this world, is there truly no medicine for regret?" he demanded. "There is," I said. "You simply cannot see it. Because in your eyes, you see only fame and profit." I wandered the streets from childhood. I was bullied by others. If I want to succeed, what is wrong with that? Why can they hold their heads high with pride, while I cannot rise in a single bound? "There is nothing wrong with wanting success," I replied calmly. "But you used the wrong method. You wished to ascend in a single step, but your foundation was not steady. How could you not fall?" I gestured upward. "Look carefully. Is there anyone in this world who can truly reach the heavens in one step?" In the end, he and I walked separate paths. He continued down his official road, and I walked my own. After that, I never saw Julian Pay again. The next news I heard of him was this: Princess Eleanor was dead. The cause: Princess Eleanor had kept several male favorites in her residence. Julian, already frustrated and resentful, saw these favorites entering and leaving freely. One day, drunk and unable to restrain himself, he fought with one of them. That man happened to be the princess's most favored companion. Princess Eleanor was furious. She ordered Julian expelled from the residence. Julian, too, could no longer endure it. In his drunken state, he struck her, unexpectedly. She fell backward and hit her head against a pillar with a heavy, resounding thud. Her eyes flew wide open, and then she fainted. By the time the imperial physician arrived, she had already stopped breathing. The princess's residence was draped entirely in white. Julian Pay was imprisoned by His Majesty, awaiting execution. The ending was already clear. That day, after class, I stepped outside and stood upon the stone steps, watching the clouds drift above the distant mountain peaks. The children gradually dispersed after lessons, passing by me one after another, their bright voices ringing out, "Goodbye, headmaster. Goodbye, master." Hearing them, my heart trembled. I was deeply glad. In this life, I had chosen another road, a road of constant self-cultivation, a road without compromise. Epilogue. That day, I was reading when Clara ran ahead, someone following behind her, calling out, "Master! Master! That person is here again." When I lifted my head, Adrian Vale was already standing at the doorway. He stepped inside. Behind him followed a young attendant carrying a food box. "This is almond pastry, candied hawthorn and rock sugar, an auspicious fruit, specially prepared by the beloved daughter of the Vale household for Miss Clara." Clara's face lit up with delight, though she tried to appear helpless as she accepted it. Soon after, Huiron entered under the pretense of serving tea. After pouring it, he lingered for quite some time, unwilling to leave. "Huiron," I asked, "don't you have class today?" He widened his innocent eyes. "Headmaster, today is a holiday. No classes." I cast Adrian a helpless glance, indicating that I truly did not know what to do with him. Unexpectedly, he turned slightly, and a tall guard with a sword at his waist appeared at the doorway. "Huiron, didn't you say last time you wanted to learn martial arts? I've brought you a master. Why are you still standing there? Hurry and pay your respects." And just like that, Huiron left, half delighted, half reluctant. Adrian had successfully escorted away 2 little obstacles. He walked over and sat beside me. "The 2 children you've raised are quite difficult to deal with," he said lazily. "Just like you." I smiled but said nothing. After a while, he added softly, "In the blink of an eye, Three Mountains Academy has already been open for 5 years. I say, headmaster, shouldn't you also start considering your lifelong affair?" I did not even lift my head. I continued reading, merely casting him a sideways glance. "How many times have you mentioned this year?" 3. 4. This is the 6th time. The man beside me stood up and began pacing around the room. "I have kept myself upright and proper all these years. I consider myself not bad at all. I have waited for you for 5 full years. Don't you feel even the slightest bit sorry for me? Is getting married really that difficult?" I kept my eyes on the book in front of me. "Look for yourself. I truly am busy. The princess consort has already given me an ultimatum," he said with exaggerated sorrow. "If I still don't get your nod this time, I needn't return home at all." "The princess consort said the same thing last year," I replied calmly. "Rest assured. She is soft-hearted despite her sharp tongue. She dotes on you the most. He let out a long, helpless sigh. I truly have no way with you. Ever since the name Three Mountains Master spread far and wide, and especially after people learned that the head of Three Mountains Academy was in fact a female master, the academy gates had been flooded with crowds. They all came to propose marriage. Among them were civil officials, military generals, and heirs of great noble families. I understood very clearly. They were not here for me. They were here for the plaque of Three Mountains. To marry me meant gaining not only the entire academy, but also the prestigious name of Three Mountains, renowned across North and South alike, especially in the past 2 years. As Three Mountains Academy continued to flourish, the number of suitors only increased. 2 years ago, there had been those who mocked me, said I was village-born, already older, that if I did not marry soon, no one would want me. Now, no one mentioned my rural background. No one mentioned my age. Each and every one of them was eager to marry me immediately. I found it exceedingly troublesome. Fortunately, the man before me had driven them all away. At that time, he had declared, Three Mountains Master is the wife destined for Adrian Vale. Whoever dares to come again shall be my enemy. I did not refute him. In my heart, I thought, dealing with one person would surely be easier than dealing with an entire crowd. Besides, given enough time, perhaps he would give up. Who would have thought that given enough time would become 5 years? Even a heart of iron and stone would soften by a few degrees. Seeing that I still did not agree, he left calmly, yet that calmness felt somewhat different from before. A few days later, I noticed that on an empty plot of land not far from the academy, people were preparing to build something. Adrian Vale stood there, fanning himself leisurely, smiling at me. If the mountain refuses to come to me, then I must go to the mountain. Since you refuse to enter the Vale residence, I shall move to your side instead. It will also be convenient for me to drive away those flies hovering around you. I crossed my arms and laughed lightly. Adrian Vale, are you that idle? He narrowed his peach blossom eyes with a grin. No matter how busy I am, I must guard my wife carefully. I could not help but laugh. Whatever he wished to do had nothing to do with me. After all, that land did not belong to me. He built a residence there and named it Elan Villa. Then, he handed every single deed and land contract over to me, and grandly moved in. When I saw that every document bore my name, I smiled faintly. Then I turned and walked back into the academy. Inside, the students were already clamoring and crying out, waiting for their meal. I could not afford to be late. And my life, it had only just begun. The end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to Love Stories with Lisa for more stories. Thank you so much.